Right to know.
Sponsored by South Dakota soybean farmers in their soybean checkoff.
Now's the time to get a Ford built for you, by you.
Military analyst, retired Lieutenant General Mark Hertling, and CNN's chief political analyst Gloria Borger. Fred, Ukrainians can't afford to wait on NATO leaders. They're keeping up the fight. What's the latest that you're seeing on the ground in Kyiv?
Hi there, Wolf. Well, it's actually quite interesting. As we're speaking right now, we actually have air raid sirens that are currently going off here in the Ukrainian capital in Kyiv. And of course, that's something that unfortunately is an all too common occurrence here on the ground in Kyiv. In fact, you can hear it right now. It doesn't necessarily mean that there's an air raid imminent, but it certainly means that the Ukrainian defenders of the city are seeing something in the air that they believe could be dangerous. And it was really that kind of day once again here in Kyiv, Wolf, as we had a lot of kinetic activity. We had a firefight that was actually seemed fairly close to where we are right now. However, the Ukrainians are saying that they are making some headway, that they're able to push the Russians back, certainly in the northwest or towards the northwest of Kyiv, where you have a suburb that's called Irpin. And in that suburb, they say they control about 80% of that right now. However, the Ukrainians are saying that there's still shelling coming from the Russians towards their position, so obviously still contested area. And then one of the new things is that the Ukrainians are now saying that to the east, they've also made some headway, apparently taken back a small town there and encircled some Russian forces. So by and large, if you look at the front here, and it's a very complex front around Kyiv, because you have several sort of places where there is fighting going on, the Ukrainians feel pretty confident right now that they can hold the Russians at bay and even push the Russians back. It's certainly what they're trying to do here, and what they say they have at least limited success doing, Wolf.
Well, you know, I keep hearing those sirens, those air raid sirens, Fred, going off now 3 or 4 times in a row, maybe more. So what happens? Do folks immediately go down to these shelters? These, you know, when there's a siren like that going off, there's bunkers obviously all over the place, and there's some more.
You know, here in the city center, most people will probably stay in their houses. We've had very little in the way of airstrikes in the city centers. But if you go especially towards the sort of more area of the outskirts, especially in the north of Kyiv, people there are already in bunkers, Wolf. We've spoken to a lot of people. We've witnessed a lot of people there who are in subway stations, others who are in the sort of basements of their houses, especially if it's sort of larger residential buildings. They all spend the night there because there has been so much activity, so much shelling going on in those areas. And certainly when they hear the sirens, obviously it's even more unnerving for them. But, you know, for us here, it's definitely obviously the cue that you have to be inside when these sirens go off. But especially for the folks who are more towards the area where some of that combat is taking place, they already are in shelters, and if they're not, they're definitely there right now. But in any case, right now, the capital is under a curfew from 8 p.m. every evening, so we're well into that already. People are all inside, but certainly now being warned that there could be obviously aircraft in the way or on the way here towards the Ukrainian city, or possibly already above it, Wolf.
Well, just be careful over there. Stay safe. Fred Plakin, appreciate it very, very much. We've got courageous journalists on the scene. You know, General Hertling, President Biden says NATO has never been more united. How forceful a message does today's summit here in Brussels actually send to Putin?
Well, it's a very big message, Wolf, because we're talking about what were Mr. Putin's strategic and operational objectives. He is currently stalemated on the battlefields in the east and the south of Ukraine. And as Fred just pointed out, the battle in the north around Kyiv was Mr. Putin's primary objective. Take the capital city, replace the government. He has not been able to do that in 4 weeks when he planned for it in 3 days. A term we're going to need to get used to, Wolf, is the Bucha Irpin Kyiv pocket. The Ukrainian forces have the Russians surrounded. In fact, the 35th Combined Arms Army surrounded in that area, and they are without supplies in the north. The Russians can't go anywhere. They are going to continue to be attrited by the Ukrainian force as long as the Ukrainians continue to get supplies. In the south, that sinking of the ship was critically important because that was a resupply ship. This will come down to the Ukrainians attriting the Russians and the Russians attempting to get resupply, which they have not been able to do. So when you talk about the president saying NATO is more united than they've ever been before. That was another strategic objective of Mr. Putin, was to further divide NATO. So he has not taken the capital of Kyiv. He has not done the things he wanted to do in the south and east of the country. He has not divided NATO, and the United States is not divided either. So all of those things contribute to Mr. Putin probably being very upset.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. You know, Gloria, how far does President Biden's leadership today go as the world watches this war drag into its second month?
Well, I think it goes a long way, as we've been just saying. This is a president who was trying to strengthen an already hamstrung NATO alliance. And I think they've surprised themselves in many ways by how united they have become. But we're just a month into this. This could drag out, and there are lots of decisions that need to be made. And there were questions that were asked today that there are no answers to, at least not that we know of. For example, what if the Russians were to decide to use some form of chemical weapon? What would the alliance do then? That's a very difficult question. The United States, for example, doesn't depend as much on Russian energy as some of the members of the NATO alliance do. Can the alliance keep it together and try and figure out a way to wean the EU off of Russian energy? So there are lots of decisions that need to be made, and every country comes at it from a different place. But at this point, NATO has been unanimous.
Very impressive indeed, what NATO has done today and what they have been doing. Guys, thank you very, very much. Just ahead, will increasing the pain on Vladimir Putin stop him, as President Biden promises? I'll get reaction from a U.S. war veteran and a key member of Congress. We're live here in Brussels, and you're in the Situation Room.
I don't just play some.
Involve bets on South Dakota State University games. South Dakota lottery sales are still rising despite a slowdown in gambling across the country. State government's share from the video lottery instant tickets and lotto appears headed for another record high. State officials are crediting the addition of more modern-style terminals for helping drive the growth of video lottery. The chance to get free gasoline is fueling a rush to get in line at some 4 dozen Chicago area gas stations. The tab for today's gas giveaway is being picked up by businessman and one-time Chicago candidate for mayor, Willie Wilson. Some waited well over an hour to reach the pump.
Students at McCook Central are taking part in a decades-old tradition to highlight the importance of agriculture in the industry. KELO's Sarah McDonald caught up with students as they arrived to school in a tractor.
Tractors rolled down the streets of Salem today as a way for students to celebrate National Ag Week and Ag Day.
Just getting to see the community's reaction and everything, and just getting to see, like this morning when we came down Main Street, everybody outside their businesses waving, and just also helping and supporting our FFA.
The annual tractor drive is a way for these students to promote agriculture in their community.
As FFA members, we do everything we can to support the agriculture industry. Getting youth involved, like having tractor drives, is super important because we want them to feel like they have some involvement in agriculture, as well as supporting the community, because they've always really supported us.
Ella Stiefvater rode to school with her cousin as part of the tractor drive.
I got to sit in the passenger seat, which is actually really exciting. We had a really good time. We drove past a retired home, so a leisure living center. We drove past the daycare and the school, so we had a lot of younger kids got to see the tractors.
Agriculture is South Dakota's leading industry, and events like this is just one way to highlight the work farmers and ranchers do.
Our community is very well-rounded in our agricultural society, and they promote it. They promote all of our activities that our students do all the way from K through 12th grade, and they just want to keep sustainable agriculture going.
I feel like it's very important just to see like how much goes into agriculture, the work and time it takes, and just how much they really do for the world when it comes to feeding and supporting everyone.
In Salem, Sarah McDonald, KELO News.
And this is the 38th year of the tractor drive. It's only been canceled 3 times. That was, of course, due to the weather.
Well, what happened to your son?
I thought it was out like 15 minutes ago.
Jay says it'll be back.
Okay, Jay just said it's coming back. Good, because we've had a lot of dreary days lately, haven't we?
Absolutely. He's working on that 7-day forecast.
First, here's a look at your local stocks.
Indoor expert.
That's kids under 25.
Huzzah! The future that every little girl will then believe that she can soar.
And believe me, as an immigrant for a kid, I can relate. It was a very touching moment yesterday.
Let me just quickly say this, because we talk about the rule of law. I think you also have to look at judicial temperament. And what you saw yesterday, beyond her talking about her early childhood, was her response to the tough questions, maybe I think some unfair questions. You saw judicial temperament.
Exactly. Thank you. Dean Goldboff, we know that many of the Supreme Court decisions are unanimous or pretty close to that, but then we're seeing more and more 5-4 or 6-3 decisions. And as I said, we have a very, in my view, an ideologically divided court. And you were asked earlier what the impact of these kinds of split decisions, especially in areas of voting rights, LGBTQ plus rights, abortion rights, workers' rights, union rights. These are the most consequential kind of cases where we can expect more split decisions. Judge Jackson was asked repeatedly about her judicial philosophy, and she does have one. It has to do with her methodology. I wanted to ask you, do you think all of our justices should view themselves as originalists?
I think every justice has to read the Constitution as they think they should. I think they have to be committed to the Constitution and committed to the judicial role in the constitutional scheme, but I do not personally think that everyone has to have the same approach to the Constitution.
I agree with you, because as an example of an originalist, if we were to follow Justice Scalia's view of originalism, we would not have same-sex marriage in our country, because the Obergefell case would have been decided very differently under Justice Scalia's view of originalism. And in fact, Justices Thomas and Alito, also originalists, and in their view, they've already signaled that they would like to revisit Obergefell. I think the LGBTQ plus community
enforced by the plain staff, again, at the behest of the government, I say it's yes, get rid of it. It's not necessary.
Well, this is the thing that I struggled with from the beginning on this, Robbie, because I always felt like, I mean, even early on, we'd heard that these planes were not necessarily super spreaders, because if they were, wouldn't the flight attendants and the pilots all been getting it? And they didn't.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, we all know now that the masks that you're required to wear, these cloth masks, they help maybe a little bit, certainly, and people who want more protection can do that, or they can choose to wear an even better mask. But in the face of Omicron and whatever's coming next, this is things getting more and more contagious, thankfully less and less deadly, and people who are vaccinated are extremely protected. But you can't convince me that we can mask our way out of this at this point. When the wave comes, people seem to get it pretty much regardless of what personal protective measures they're taking. And vaccination is really the important thing, not masking.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about, speaking of vaccinations, what's happening in New York now, because we have the situation where Kyrie Irving of the Brooklyn Nets can now play in home games. It used to be he couldn't play in home games, but he could play on the road because New York has its vaccine restrictions, and they've now flipped that. And again, we're calling this COVID common sense again. I'm guessing you're going to say it's about time.
Yeah, it's absolutely about time. Look, the person who is most affected by being vaccinated or not being vaccinated is that person. It would be one thing if it was still true that when you got vaccinated, you were so unlikely to get COVID that you weren't going to spread it to anyone else. Look, we now know that's just not true. What the vaccines are for is making it so that the person who gets the vaccine is not going to get, or is very unlikely to get extremely sick with COVID. It's not really protecting anyone else. So the argument for requiring it for the good of other people, I just don't see how you can really justify that. If people, very healthy people like athletes, want to make a different choice than getting vaccinated, I think that's between them and their doctor. It's not a matter of public policy. You can't justify it.
Right. And I know you and I have talked about this before, Robbie, but I've kind of lost track of all the guidelines. I don't even know what we're supposed to or not supposed to do anymore, but I didn't realize.
Meanwhile, Brett, the squeeze continues on Putin with more of his lawmakers sanctioned and restrictions on Russia's ability to do transactions in gold now in place. Brett.
Amy Kellogg in London. Amy, thank you. Up next, Dr. Jeanette Neshwa details what she experienced while providing medical care inside Ukraine. First, here's what some of our Fox affiliates around the country are covering tonight. This country, Fox 2 in Detroit, where the University of Michigan settles a lawsuit brought by students seeking to change how the school protects the campus from sexual misconduct. Under the agreement, the school will create and pay for a committee designed to protect the university community from sexual abuse. The school has recently been rocked by hundreds of sexual assault allegations. And this is a live look at Chicago from our affiliate, Fox 32. A little rainy there. One of the big stories there tonight, flocks of people heading to select gas stations, about 4850 of them across Chicago and its suburbs, as a local businessman, Willie Wilson, donates $1 million worth of free gas for those struggling to afford the high prices. Each car is allotted $50 worth of gas. Kind of a good deal. That's tonight's live look outside the Beltway from Special Report. We'll be right back.
I think it's strategic.
We had excellent discussions with the President yesterday. I am aware of not only the extraordinary work that you've done on behalf of the Russian people.
We've had great meetings. We have a very, very good relationship.
Donald Trump's warmth towards Putin is well known, and it may be complicated, as we've reported, but what's actually telling about Putin's abilities is that all of this predates Donald Trump's unusual presidency. The ex-KGB officer has proven pretty effective at personal diplomacy, given the hand he's playing. He even drew one of the perhaps most odd compliments an American president has ever given any Russian leader when George W. Bush talked about Putin's soul, which was later mocked by Hillary Clinton.
I found it to be very straightforward and trustworthy. We had a very good dialogue. I was able to get a sense of his soul. He's a man deeply committed to his country and the best interests of his country.
This is the president that looked in the soul of Putin, and I could have told him he was a KGB agent. By definition, he doesn't have a soul. I mean, this is a waste of time, right?
A waste of time, but one that the United States and its diplomats have to contend with. Putin has also found ways to try to play administrations off each other. He does not practice democracy at home, but he has some understanding of the politics of a democracy. By the time Obama tapped Clinton as his Secretary of State, she was trying her own version of Russian outreach, meeting with Putin's top diplomat, Sergei Lavrov, to present, remember this? A giant reset button that was supposed to symbolize a jumpstart and reset for these two countries' relationship.
We want to reset our relationship. And
Let's do it together.
So we will do it together, okay?
Thank you very much.
You are very welcome.
That's the warmth of diplomacy. Many diplomats try it. We should note the diplomat you see there on the Russian side, though, Lavrov, is the same one Trump would later host in the Oval Office after firing James Comey over the Russia probe. So things got even trickier. Lavrov's still in that post today, pushing Putin's global agenda. As for Clinton, well, she concluded Putin was getting more out of those types of gestures than the United States. And by 2013, she said she was counseling Obama against flattering Putin with high-level attention. Decline his invitation for a presidential summit, she said. It was 2 years later that President Obama's hardcore glare at Putin at a UN meeting got some notice around the world. Many nations were soon glaring at Russia when it made that first incursion into Ukraine, which was a year later, a year after that photo with Obama in 2014. The Times reported how Putin reclaimed Crimea for Russia and bitterly denounced the West along the way. Now, that move was not a full-scale war to formally topple a government, but it was a new line crossed. It showed what Putin was doing, feeling strong, unchallenged at home and bent on defying even the appeals to his own interests from a much more powerful country, the United States. As Obama put it, why disrupt Ukraine when doing so would mean Western sanctions? There's no single confirmed answer, only the reality that those partial sanctions back then did not slow Putin down. Today is different. He faces crippling, massive, enduring sanctions for what is a full-scale war. Another answer to the question of what Putin was thinking then and now is that his strategy is to take great risks or costs because he is hell-bent on a Russian resurgence. He's long viewed the Soviet collapse as a kind of tragedy. He called it the geopolitical catastrophe of the century. And he's pushed the idea that Russia must counter the West, and specifically NATO, which he claims he views as a provocation that's outlasted its Cold War-era use. So that's another answer if you think this is all consistent foreign policy. A third possibility is that Putin thinks Ukraine must just be a part of Russia, that this is Ukraine-specific. Last year, he wrote an essay asserting true sovereignty of Ukraine is possible only in partnership with Russia. We are one people. That's kind of like how he once claimed that his rule of Russia would follow a path away from harmful communism and towards being, well, something that he lies about, towards being, he claimed, a democracy.
Tonight, the winds will pick up, especially here in eastern KELO later tonight. Our overnight lows will be in the low 30s, and then tomorrow, mostly sunny skies.
The multi-party system is a reality now. Russians can elect their president, the deputies of the State Duma, governors, and local governments.
A younger Putin claims.
Live from KELOLAND Media Group, KELOLAND News at 6.
More help is on the way from KELO.
Tanks, planes, air defense systems, and anti-ship weapons. Tonight, Cecilia Vega with the president in Brussels. Also tonight, here, NATO's show of force. ABC News given exclusive access to NATO joint exercises with U.S. troops. Martha Raddatz with American soldiers. And what she's learning tonight from her sources, what U.S. authorities are also now considering sending to Ukraine. Martha is live in Warsaw tonight. The harrowing images coming in from Mariupol, and tonight what Russia is now saying about that besieged city in Ukraine, claiming they are about to take control. More than 100,000 remain there with little food, water, or power. James Longman live in Ukraine tonight. The humanitarian crisis tonight, the new and alarming number. UNICEF now saying 4.3 million Ukrainian children have now been displaced by this Russian war in Ukraine. That's more than half the children in Ukraine. The mothers and children we found in an old theater built by Ukrainians, and their message right here tonight. Just in tonight, the new images of North Korea's latest provocation, launching its first intercontinental ballistic missile in more than 4 years, as world leaders meet here in Europe. And the breaking headline in Washington tonight, involving the wife of Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas. The text messages from Virginia Thomas to former President Trump's White House chief of staff, pressing him to pursue efforts to overturn the election of Joe Biden. The extraordinary communications between the justice's wife and the Trump White House.
From ABC News, this is a special edition of World News Tonight with David Muir, reporting tonight from the Poland-Ukraine border.
And good evening tonight from the Ukraine-Poland border. President Biden here in Europe for that emergency NATO summit over Russia's war in Ukraine. The invasion began 1 month ago today. President Biden rallying the allies to remain united, announcing new sanctions against Russian lawmakers, oligarchs, and Russian defense companies, committing $1 billion in aid to help in this humanitarian crisis, money for food, water, and medicine, and saying the U.S. will now welcome 100,000 refugees to America. The president was pressed on how the U.S. would respond if Russia uses chemical weapons in Ukraine, and he was pressed on China, what he said about his warning to President Xi. President Biden and leaders of 30 other NATO countries coming together, U.S. officials reporting the mood was sober and resolute. President Biden coming before cameras saying NATO has never been more united and that Vladimir Putin is getting exactly the opposite of what he intended. Ukraine's President Zelenskyy addressing the leaders from Ukraine with a new plea for more weapons, warning Russia does not intend to stop in Ukraine.
Meanwhile, Russian forces firing rocket launchers in the streets of Mariupol. The dramatic new video here tonight shown on Russian state television. And then late today, what Russia is now claiming about that city, claiming they are set to take control. A driver in that city capturing the devastation. And Ukraine claiming it has now hit a Russian warship in the occupied port city of Berdyansk. And tonight, our exclusive look at NATO exercises being conducted along the Poland-Belarus border. They are calling it a show of force tonight. And here in Poland, where millions of Ukrainians are fleeing from their country, that new number, 4.3 million Ukrainian children now displaced by this war. President Biden will be here in Poland tomorrow, and of course we have it all covered tonight, beginning with our chief White House correspondent Cecilia Vega traveling with the president in Brussels.
Tonight, 1 month into this war, the Ukrainian Navy claiming a victory, saying they destroyed this massive Russian cargo ship not far from the besieged city of Mariupol, disrupting Vladimir Putin's plans to resupply his forces with tanks and weapons. This verified video circulating online shows a ship burning in a port, while up north, the Ukrainian military keeping Russian troops at bay 35 miles outside the capital city of Kyiv. There, President Volodymyr Zelenskyy virtually addressing Western allies gathered for the emergency NATO summit in Brussels. NATO has yet to show what the alliance can do to save people, he said. And then this plea. Give us 1% of all your aircraft, 1% of all your tanks, 1%. Anti-ship weapons, means of air defense. Is it possible to fight such a war without it? World leaders today did not announce any new shipments of tanks or planes to Ukraine, but on the world stage, President Biden did insist military equipment is flowing into Ukraine right now. And he says NATO allies united in the face of Russian aggression is what will ultimately defeat Putin.
Putin was banking on NATO being split. NATO has never been more united than it is today. Putin is getting exactly the opposite what he intended to have as a consequence of going into Ukraine.
And if Russia uses chemical weapons, as U.S. officials fear they could, President Biden delivering this warning.
We would respond. We would respond if he uses it. The nature of the response would depend on the nature of the use.
We asked exactly what that would mean. If chemical weapons were used in Ukraine, would that trigger a military response from NATO?
It would trigger a response in kind. Whether or not you're asking whether NATO would cross, we'd make that decision at the time.
President Biden also discussing his conversation with Chinese President Xi, urging him not to help Russia in any way.
I made no threats, but I pointed out the number of American and foreign corporations have left Russia as a consequence of their barbaric behavior. Because I think that China understands that its economic future is much more closely tied to the West than it is to Russia. And so I'm hopeful that he does not get engaged.
And tonight, the president standing firm in his decision not to send American troops into Ukraine. We asked him if Putin is taking advantage of that. Sir, you've made it very clear in this conflict that you do not want to see World War III. But is it possible that in expressing that so early that you were too quick to rule out direct military intervention in this war? Could Putin have been emboldened knowing that you are not going to get involved directly in this conflict?
No and no.
And Cecilia Vega joined us from Brussels tonight. And Cecilia, President Biden making immediate global headlines with something else he said today as well, saying he supports removing Russia from the G20.
Yeah, David, of course, that group of the world's largest economies, the president saying he brought this up in the meetings that took place behind me here today, kicking Russia out of the G20. He said if other member nations do not agree with that, the president wants to see Ukraine invited to those G20 meetings. Of course, Russia was kicked out of the smaller group, the G8, back in 2014 when it invaded Crimea. But kicking a nation out of the G20 would be unprecedented. David, clearly President Biden wants to see Putin isolated with whatever leverage remains.
Cecilia Vega leading us off from Brussels tonight. Cecilia, thank you. And tonight here, our exclusive access to those NATO forces conducting military exercises, including American troops, right here in Poland, right along the border with Belarus. ABC's Martha Raddatz tonight with American soldiers. And Martha, on what she's learning tonight from her sources, what U.S. authorities are also now considering sending to Ukraine.
Just 10 miles from Belarus, Russia's staunchest ally, the piercing rattle of heavy artillery fire. Today, ABC News given exclusive access to joint NATO exercises with U.S. troops. The same day President Biden told the world there will be a greater troop presence overall on the eastern flank. Here in Poland, more than 2,000 NATO troops converging by land, air, and water. War games that seemed all too real.
This exercise takes place twice a year, but of course this year is different. And the polls will tell you boldly, it's more than an exercise, it's a show of force.
With the threat that the war in Ukraine could expand and the Pentagon worried the Russians will target military supplies inside Poland, the Polish brigade commander remains on high alert.
How likely do you think it is that the Russians would attack Poland?
No one knows. We were told that they don't attack the Ukraine. Now we can see the destroyed towns and the burning people, so it's crazy.
NATO's core objective is deter and defend, but the prospect of face-to-face combat is not far from anyone's mind.
The troops here today are not only from Poland, but Romania, the UK, Croatia, and leading the way, the Americans.
These soldiers are with California's National Guard, along with hundreds of other American soldiers here in Poland supporting NATO.
All that's going on in Ukraine, it's so hard to watch, isn't it?
It's difficult to watch and not be able to do anything because we're direct action type people, you know, and our whole motto while we're here is stronger together, and no nation should stand alone.
The Americans remain hopeful that conflict won't spill over NATO's border, but if it does, and these war games turn into reality, they say they are ready.
And Martha Raddatz with us live from Warsaw tonight. And Martha, we heard the president speak of military aid flowing across the border here in Poland today. As President Biden was on the stage, he talked about that. And right now, we also heard the President Zelenskyy asking for more weapons with concern over any potential chemical attack by Russia. You're learning from your sources the administration is now looking at getting chem bio detection systems into Ukraine as well.
Exactly, David. We know military aid is already flowing across the border where you are, but President Zelenskyy did ask for more today. With the threat of a chemical attack, we learned tonight that the administration is looking at getting chem bio detection systems into Ukraine. And David, we saw that incredible video of that massive Russian ship that the Ukrainians claimed they were able to blow up. They want to be able to do more of that given the brutal bombardment from Russian ships. So NATO and the U.S. are looking at options for anti-ship systems to give the Ukrainians as well. David?
Martha Raddatz with us from Warsaw tonight. Martha, thank you. And there are new images coming in from Mariupol inside Ukraine tonight, what Russia is now claiming this evening about that city. ABC's James Longman from Lviv, Ukraine tonight.
Tonight, Russia may be edging closer to controlling Mariupol. But the battle is still raging. Russian forces firing rocket launchers in the streets. A dramatic new video shown on Russian state television. This new development that Russia may be closer to taking control of Mariupol, seen in this horrific drone video released by a right-wing paramilitary group now fighting with the Ukrainians. Bombed out apartment buildings, everything destroyed, leaving so many to ask, what does victory really mean here? Hundreds lining up today to receive humanitarian aid from pro-Russian forces, wanting to be seen to provide for the very people they're making homeless. But for some, it's too late. This woman says her husband had diabetes and died after days without enough food. The world waiting to see if Russia will claim this soil for itself.
And a Russian official has now said they want to permanently occupy Mariupol. The head of Putin's ruling party with the chilling remark, no one should have any doubts, Russia is here forever. David?
James Longman with us from inside Ukraine tonight. James, thank you. President Biden, of course, will be here in Poland tomorrow with this worsening humanitarian crisis. More than 10 million Ukrainians now displaced from their homes. And tonight, this new number from UNICEF, 4.3 million of them are children. That's more than half of all children in Ukraine.
We are told about an old Ukrainian theater built just over the border here in Poland. That theater now being used for refugees. Inside the door, up on that stage, behind a crib, the young mother holding her baby boy. Another picking up her child, a kiss to the cheek. It's been a long, difficult journey.
It's an extraordinary thing to see. This theater has now become a shelter. They tell me there were performances here right up until 1 month ago when the war in Ukraine began. Now the theater is filled with families, mothers and their children who live here. And up on stage, the moms with the youngest of the children, the babies, who have been here now for many days. You have a beautiful baby.
Oksana holds 7-month-old Alexander.
What has been the most difficult part about all of this?
She tells us the journey. From her hometown, Cherniv, she talks about all of the trains from Kyiv to Lviv, then to Poland. She thanks those along the way who helped.
What is your hope for your country?
She says, I hope Ukraine is going to win and is going to beat the Russians. We're going to go back home to rebuild our country. All of our husbands, brothers, our families are there.
And Alexander's father is home?
Yes, she tells us, he's fighting the Russians.
And have you heard from him?
She tells me yes, that sometimes she can speak with him. He says he's okay.
He's okay.
She tells me traveling with the baby has been difficult.
Is that yours?
She says the crocodile was a gift from a volunteer in a shelter in Kyiv. The volunteers, the workers here in Poland, are now helping more than 2 million refugees in this country alone. The toll on the families and on those trying to help them.
You never thought you would see this?
This?
Yeah.
Never thought. It's very hard to talk about it.
In a theater full of joy just 1 month ago.
And instead of seeing the children perform on the stage, they now live on the stage.
Yes, these children actually now just playing on this stage. It's not any performance.
Yeah.
Then there are the children traveling alone. We met Fyodor, who is 15. His parents in Odessa sent him to safety.
Are you here alone?
Yes.
By yourself?
We ask him about the war.
What do you think Vladimir Putin wants?
I don't know.
You don't know?
Yes.
What is your hope for Ukraine?
Peace.
Peace?
Yes.
He hopes to go home soon. He shows us his basketball jersey. He's number 11.
It's hard to play basketball in a theater. Yeah, we'll get you back to basketball soon.
Thank you.
Elmira is 16. She's here with her sister and her mother. She remembers the last day of school.
24 February.
So it's been 1 month.
Her father and her brother are fighting against the Russians.
Do you talk to your father and brother?
Yes, of course.
How are they?
50-50.
Yeah. Are they helping the Ukrainian military? What do you want to tell the rest of the world about Ukraine?
This is a beautiful country. You have a beautiful person, a good person.
Good people.
Yes.
The good people of Ukraine.
Yes.
We know that, and we see that. And we hope you go home soon.
Yes, I hope to.
And that young mother up on stage, Oksana, with her little boy, Alexander, hoping she goes home soon. The heartbreaking images and the bravery from inside that theater, built by Ukrainians in 1904, more than a century later, now a site for Ukrainian refugees. Our coverage of the war for tonight. Well, back in Washington at this hour, the breaking headline tonight involving the wife of Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas. The text messages from Virginia Thomas to former President Trump's White House chief of staff, pressing him to pursue efforts to overturn the election of Joe Biden. Here's Rachel Scott.
Tonight, the extraordinary text messages from the wife of a Supreme Court justice to President Trump's White House chief of staff, Mark Meadows, in the days after the 2020 election. ABC News confirming a Washington Post report that Ginny Thomas, wife of Justice Clarence Thomas, texted Meadows urging him to keep challenging the election results, writing, "Help this great president stand firm, Mark. Biden and the left is attempting the greatest heist of our history." These messages sent at a time when Trump was vowing to take his efforts to overturn the election all the way to the Supreme Court, where Justice Thomas could help decide his fate.
In those text messages to Meadows, Ginny Thomas was urging Trump's team to continue their efforts to try and overturn the results of the 2020 election. And again, all this playing out as Trump was hoping the Supreme Court would throw it all in his favor, David.
Rachel Scott with us live tonight. Rachel, thank you. When we come back here, North Korea launching its first intercontinental ballistic missile in more than 4 years as world...
Papa Murphy's Kitchen, the Buffalo Ranch Chicken Pizza.
Not too much to ask for, but many contend that it's a lot.
Yeah, well, it's certainly understandable, that's for sure. Robert Sherman, continued great reporting from Poland. Thanks for the time. 100,000 refugees might sound like a lot, but put this into perspective here. The number of migrants who come into the U.S. from across the southern border every single month. Last month alone, Customs and Border Patrol encountered nearly 165,000 migrants, and that's been the case every month for a year now. In fact, even more than that. So joining me now for more, someone who covers the border for us, Jorge Ventura with the Daily Caller. Jorge, it's good to see you. It's been a little while. I know we've been covering the situation in Ukraine, but you do have some new reporting for us. But put this into perspective for us, because with 100,000 Ukrainian refugees coming over, that's about 2 weeks worth of people crossing the U.S. border.
Yeah, exactly, Joe. It's really not too much when you kind of look at the kind of grand landscape of everything. Just last month, we had 165 migrant encounters. For all of 2021, we had about 2 million minor encounters, and we're not even counting the 500,000 of those gotaways. So that's the migrants that the Border Patrol isn't able to get. So what we are seeing with the Ukrainians as of right now is that they're flying into Mexico City. From Mexico City, they'll make their way to Tijuana, and they'll enter the United States through there if they're entering on foot. The Ukrainians also don't need a visa to arrive in Mexico. All they need is a passport. So I would expect these next couple months to see Ukrainians arriving in Tijuana. We'll see probably a larger influx. But from my experience, I've actually met a lot of Russians and Ukrainian and Eastern Europeans actually flying into Mexicali, from Mexicali going to Los Algodones and crossing into the Yuma sector. So we'll see how that looks in the next couple months.
I heard that the Russians and Ukrainians are already running into issues crossing the border. Russians getting different treatment than the Ukrainians. Is that true?
Yeah, that's true, Joe. So right now, the United States is allowing Ukrainians to come inside the United States. But right now, the Russians, the anti-war Russians escaping that Putin regime have been essentially stuck in Tijuana. We'll see what happens with immigration officials, how they handle that. And then another kind of thing in the mix of this is the Biden administration is already in talks with Mexico to end Title 42 next month. So Title 42 was the Trump-era coronavirus policy that allowed the Trump administration to immediately deport a migrant back to their country without having going through the immigration process, like speaking to lawyers in any type of hearing. So that's also another factor to think about, that Title 42 coming to an end next month.
Right, turned away for health reasons because of the pandemic. Let's get you, Jorge, while we have you, on some of your fentanyl reporting, because I know you recently talked with a mother who had lost a son to fentanyl. It was a pill he took after an injury that was laced with fentanyl. Here's a little of your interview.
He had the best smile. He was always there for his friends. He was always there for us.
This is something, Jorge, we've been following closely. How did he get the pill? Did you find out?
Yeah, so 22-year-old Jordan Erickson from Palmdale, California, was working out at his local gym. And during one of his workouts, he actually ended up popping his knee. And right there, one of the locals in the gym ran up to Jordan and said, "Hey, I have an Oxycontin. It's a painkiller. Take this and it'll help your pain immediately." Oh. Unfortunately, Jordan did take that pill, and that pill did end up being a counterfeit laced with fentanyl. Jordan was actually discovered by his mother the next day, 24 hours later, dead from that pill. So this is a trend that we're seeing across the United States. And right now, according to the CDC, fentanyl is a leading cause of death for Americans aged between 18 and 45 years old. And there's kind of this stereotype where when people hear of a fentanyl overdose death, they think it's a drug user or what they call a junkie. These are Americans who are taking these pills for the very first time. We also are speaking to a family named Alexander Villa. He's a 14-year-old boy from Orange County, California. He actually took a counterfeit Oxycontin as well that he bought from Snapchat and was found dead the next day. So this is a trend we're seeing across the United States and something that we're trying to really bring attention to.
It's people using drugs recreationally as well who don't realize that fentanyl is in what they're taking. It's just heartbreaking. So, Jorge, there's another story we wanted to get you on quickly here about this crock pot full of meat that was carrying, what, more than 100,000 fentanyl pills?
Yeah, it's over 100,000, and what's pretty alarming is that when I'm speaking to Border Patrol or Texas State Troopers, they're saying that it's pretty difficult to kind of seize the fentanyl because there's no odor. They're able to now make it into these small pills and press them. That's how they're able to press them and get them identically to match with Oxycontin. The last conversation I had with Texas State Troopers, so far they've at least seized over 200 million legal doses of fentanyl off the streets, but one has to wonder all the fentanyl that they didn't catch that's making its way still in the United States. And the current border crisis, as we're going to see this migrant influx, is going to play a role in allowing more fentanyl to come in as Border Patrol will continue to be overwhelmed at the southern border.
Jorge Ventura, the Daily Caller, good to see you. Thanks, my friend. Ahead, it's the clothes that make the man, or in this case, tells the story of two presidents. We're back with that after this.
I don't just play someone brain.
The JCPOA that we are going to have to be monitoring now will be more complex than the one that was originally signed in 2015. Now you have an Iran that is enriching uranium at 60%, which is in every practical sense almost military level.
Officials with the IAEA talking about the complexity of the new Iran nuclear deal, and there are questions about whether it's as good as the old deal that was scrapped back in 2015. This as it's close. Reuters is reporting that Iran's foreign minister says the nuclear deal is closer than ever. Following 11 months of negotiations, Iran and the United States are now saying that the ball is in the other's court to revive the accord, which would curb Tehran's nuclear program in exchange for lifting tough sanctions on Iran's economy. We should point out that critics say would not curb that, and it would provide a runway to a nuclear bomb. That's what they say. We're back with our panel. Guy, it's really amazing that all of this is happening in this context as Russia is sitting at the table in Vienna as a deal, we're told, and confirming would include enriched uranium from Iran going to Russia in the middle of a time where we're concerned about Russia using nuclear weapons in Ukraine and elsewhere.
Well, it really is astounding.
The juxtaposition is really amazing.
Yeah. Totally amazing, astonishing, but this is the current reality. I mean, we don't really know precisely what is in this would-be deal. It's been kept secret from the American people and the American Congress so far. But what we have learned through leaks and rumors is quite disturbing, that it would in fact be weaker than the 2015 Obama-era version. So weak, in fact, that 3 members of Biden's own negotiating team resigned in protest, quit the process because of the extent of the capitulations that the U.S. was agreeing to. What we do know is that the man negotiating on our behalf is a Kremlin Putin diplomat, because the Iranians won't talk to us directly. So you have the Russians speaking in this context on our behalf to another enemy of the United States, supposedly with our interests at heart, which is insane. And that lead negotiator, that Russian negotiator, recently in an interview said that the Iranians got far more than anyone could have ever expected. He was sort of bragging about that. The Russians would make off like bandits from this as well. And he also thanked the Chinese for their help in these talks. All of that, I would say, adds up to a very alarming picture.
Leslie, it's tough to explain this in context. The administration says they need to get to this deal to try to lock in Iran's nukes and to prevent them from getting a nuclear weapon. Again, I mentioned critics are really questioning whether that happens. And outside of that, Iran's activities funding terrorist groups, funding the Houthis in Yemen, and actually firing missiles at or near our U.S. consulate in Iraq. It's kind of weird timing for this.
I said that before with you, Brett. The timing is a concern, and that's why we see people left and right, Democrat and Republican, who are having issues with this. And to Guy's point, that it would be an even weaker deal than 2015. Here's the problem, okay? You know, and there are problems on both sides. When you look to Russia, Vladimir Putin could seek to gain, what, $20 billion if he helps to build not one but two nuclear plants for Iran, which this deal could lead to and have a pathway to. And then you have Iran, which we look at since November, which has increased its enrichment of uranium over 12 pounds just since November. That is very concerning. But then you even have the political side of this, which is how do you sell, Democrat or Republican, removing the Islamic Revolutionary Guard from the foreign terrorist organization list? And that's going to be a problem to sell to constituents at home, left or right.
It's not a treaty, Matthew. It doesn't have to go through the Senate. It just has the administration's blessing.
Well, you've heard of strategy, Brett, but this by Biden is strategery, and it's going to be a disaster.
All right, we'll leave it there. Strong
than any vehicle on the road. The 2022 Chrysler Pacifica.
Investigate TV tackles the top topics. When your health is compromised, we investigate. Corporate greed exposed. The powerful held accountable with in-depth journalism led by award-winning journalist Lee Zurich. Download Investigate TV for your Roku and Amazon Fire devices.
Huddle up, sports viewers, and enjoy Arby's corned beef Reuben. Arby's corned beef. Arby's. Come on! Arby's, we have the meats.
Tonight, our special edition from Brussels with President Biden at the emergency NATO summit over the war in Ukraine. Ukrainian forces saying they destroyed a Russian warship as the war enters a second month. President Biden on the world stage with fellow NATO leaders saying Russia should be booted from the G20. And his new warning, if Russia uses chemical weapons in Ukraine, the U.S. and NATO will respond. The U.S. now pledging to take in up to 100,000 Ukrainian refugees. And the disturbing new allegation is Moscow forcibly taking Ukrainian civilians to Russia. Also, my one-on-one with the NATO Secretary General, I asked him about Ukrainian President Zelensky's comments that NATO has yet to show it can save people, how he responded, and the American missionary now missing in Ukraine, his wife speaking out to NBC News what she fears has happened to him. Also tonight, former President Donald Trump filing a new lawsuit against Hillary Clinton and her allies, what he's alleging about the 2016 election. Is relief on the way from sky-high gas prices? A growing number of states take matters into their own hands. And Peacock Pride, can the March Madness Cinderellas pull off another miracle in the Sweet 16?
This is NBC Nightly News with Lester Holt, reporting tonight from Brussels.
And good evening from Brussels. 1 month since the start of Russia's military surge into Ukraine, President Biden and 29 other NATO leaders met here in Brussels today, looking to project unity and outlining next steps to help supply Ukraine, strengthen the defense of NATO's borders, and further isolate Russia. One of the voices resonating from that meeting, Ukraine's President Zelenskyy. He appeared remotely and accused the leaders of failing to save lives. In a few moments, the response to those comments from NATO's Secretary General during my interview with him this evening. The gravity of the moment underscored by news U.S. national security teams are exploring various contingency plans, including responses to the use of chemical weapons by Russia. We'll take you to Ukraine shortly, but we want to begin here in Brussels with President Biden's high-stakes visit. Here's Kristen Welker.
After warning Vladimir Putin may use chemical and biological weapons in Ukraine, tonight President Biden at an emergency NATO summit declaring the U.S. will take action if there's a chemical attack.
We would respond if he uses it. The nature of the response would depend on the nature of the use.
But when pressed, still no specifics on whether military force is on the table.
It would trigger a response in kind. Whether or not you're asking whether NATO would cross, we'd make that decision at the time.
The president saying this summit with leaders of NATO, the G7 and the EU is sending an unmistakable message to Putin.
He didn't think we could sustain this cohesion. NATO has never been more united than it is today. Putin is getting exactly the opposite what he intended to have.
Mr. Biden and NATO announcing new penalties against Russia, including new sanctions on Russian lawmakers and $1 billion in humanitarian aid for Ukraine. That money a part of recently approved funds. But Ukraine's President Zelenskyy, speaking by video to the summit, was sharply critical of the U.S. and NATO for not doing more, saying Ukrainians are dying and NATO, quote, has yet to show what it can do to save people, pleading for tanks, fighter jets, and a no-fly zone. Zelenskyy saying Ukraine is waiting for real actions. Meanwhile, Mr. Biden saying he will push for Russia to be removed from the group of major economies known as the G20, and that so far China, which like much of Europe still buys Russian oil and gas, has not given Russia more military aid.
China understands that its economic future is much more closely tied to the West than it is to Russia. And so I'm hopeful that he does not get engaged.
So far, the U.S. and NATO allies have unleashed significant sanctions against Russia for the invasion. But those penalties have not deterred Putin, something the White House and Vice President Harris initially said was the goal.
The purpose of the sanctions has always been and continues to be deterrence.
But today, the president bristling when asked if that strategy was not working.
I did not say that, in fact, the sanctions would deter him. Sanctions never deter. You keep talking about that. Sanctions never deter. The maintenance of sanctions, the increasing the pain, that's what will stop him.
And Kristen joining me here in Brussels right now. The president heading to Poland tomorrow. That, of course, the epicenter of the refugee crisis.
That's right, Lester. In fact, President Biden hinted he may meet with refugees while he's in Poland. And it comes as the U.S. announced today it will take in up to 100,000 Ukrainian refugees.
Okay,
Lester.
Kristen Welker, thank you. 1 month into its invasion, Russian forces tonight are intensifying their assault on eastern Ukraine, especially in the hard-hit city of Mariupol, while being driven back from Ukraine's capital. Richard Engel is in Ukraine tonight.
Russia has by now all but flattened Mariupol. New images released by officials in Mariupol show the once thriving port city has been devastated by Russian bombs. Ukrainian officials say 100,000 people remain in Mariupol and they're cut off without food or water. U.S. military officials say Russia is now concentrating its assault on the east of Ukraine, around Mariupol, close to the Russian border. Russia has begun to resupply its troops there. Russian television showing the arrival of a landing ship in a port on the Sea of Azov, with fighting vehicles unloaded and readied for battle. Today, Russia's plans took a turn. The ship was in flames. Ukrainian forces claim they destroyed it this morning and damaged 2 other Russian vessels. Russia's new focus on the east may be out of duress. Ukrainian forces are making advances around Kyiv, pushing back Russian troops from the capital. But Russia's air bombardment hasn't stopped. Victoria, 66 and retired, was in her apartment when a Russian missile exploded outside her window. Shards of glass cutting her all over. We filmed where the missile landed, in the center of Victoria's housing complex, damaging a nearby school and grocery. There were no military targets here. Victoria says she has panic attacks when she thinks about that day. Her wish, the evildoers must be punished, she says.
Richard joining us now. Richard, we're a month into this invasion. You've been covering it from the very start. Does it seem like we're closer to a conclusion or that this will keep going indefinitely?
I think we should be bracing for a long conflict. The air raid sirens first started going off in the city a month ago, and they are still going off every single day. And based on how Russia's consolidating its forces, it seems like Putin has decided to embark on a long war of attrition. The Ukrainians have the moral advantage. They're fighting for their homes. They have a lot of fighting spirit. But Russia still has an overwhelming majority in terms of weapons and troops. Lester?
Yeah, a lot more chapters to be written in this war. Richard, thank you. Tonight, a deeper look at one of the hardest hit cities, Mariupol. Molly Hunter speaking tonight with Ukrainians who went through hell and endured possible war crimes.
21-year-old Volodymyr's family lived in Mariupol for generations.
I'm Ukrainian. I was born in Ukraine.
As Russia bombarded the port city, they spent weeks in hiding.
They were methodically destroying this city. The method of the burned ground.
Scorched earth.
The scorched earth method.
He and his parents escaped in this car, leaving their apartment like this. Now in Lviv, Volodymyr still can't warm up after weeks underground and below freezing temperatures. Today, according to Ukrainian officials, nearly 3,000 people were able to make it out of Mariupol alive, most to Zaporizhia.
Even the war has some rules. You cannot use some weapons, you cannot harm civilians, you cannot damage hospitals.
But 1 month in, Russia has done all of that.
If you ever seen the photos of Aleppo,
yeah, the same.
This is the same. This is Aleppo.
There's a variety of war crimes we're talking about here. Indiscriminate attacks, disproportionate attacks, and even attacks directed at civilians.
Richard Weir with Human Rights Watch says what's important is the ICC is already investigating so people could be held accountable.
Which never happened in Aleppo, for example.
Never happened. And right now the international community has an opportunity to break this cycle of impunity and finally hold those individuals to account for what they've done.
But the process is a long one, and Volodymyr says there's still time to stop another Mariupol.
I also want all the people, and even Mr. Biden and other political guys in the nations, to understand that if we fall, you're next.
Also today, the Prosecutor General here in Ukraine is investigating whether or not 2,000 Ukrainian kids were deported to Russia. If that's true, that would also constitute a war crime. Lester?
Molly Hunter, thanks. NATO this evening standing by its commitment to supply Ukraine with weapons and other aid, but reminding that its obligation to the beleaguered non-NATO nation only goes so far. This evening, I sat down with NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg. I'd like to get your response to President Zelensky's remarks today. He said NATO has yet to demonstrate its ability to save people. Do you think that was an appropriate, a fair remark?
I think all NATO allies listened very carefully to President Zelensky, and we admire his courage and political strength in the way he stands up against the invading Russian forces. NATO allies are providing significant support to Ukraine and their armed forces with advanced air defense systems, with anti-tank weapons and ammunition, fuel and many other types of support.
Not the things he's been asking for in terms of a no-fly zone, in terms of tanks, in terms of fighter aircraft.
Again, we are providing a lot of different types of weapons.
The idea of a peacekeeping force has been rejected by this body for fear of igniting a war between NATO and Russia. And this is a difficult question for me to ask, but is there a point in which war becomes necessary, that it's worth to take the risk because of the level of the atrocities?
NATO has one core responsibility, and that is to protect and defend 1 billion people living in 30 allied countries. We do that by sending a very clear message to Moscow that an attack on one ally will trigger a response from the whole alliance. But of course, our responsibility is to then both support Ukraine, but at the same time prevent an escalation of this conflict to become a full-fledged war between NATO and Russia.
You and President Biden have expressed concern about the use of chemical weapons by the Russians. Do you rule out a military response if there is a use of chemical weapons?
As President Biden has stated several times, any use of chemical weapons will have severe consequences. It is absolutely unacceptable. It will be a blatant violation of international law, and it will have severe consequences.
NATO's Jens Stoltenberg tonight. In 60 seconds, an American missionary whose family says he was abducted in Ukraine, the urgent effort to find him. And orphans of war were with some of the most vulnerable children driven from their country.
Because of corruption in manufacturing, and they do fear exactly what you just said, that the Russians will dig in and be able to pummel cities. And unfortunately, they say Ukraine will be unable to effectively evict the Russians if the Russians hunker down. What does that say about where we're going in this war?
Well, I think it underlines, Nick, the importance of logistics, which is too often a sort of a misinterpreted or discarded factor in warfare. But a siege campaign, the rockets, the missiles, and the artillery rounds that the Russians will depend on have to come from Belarus or Russia. And they have to transit relatively vulnerable logistics lines. Basically, they are road-bound. And it's these road-bound resupply convoys that are exceedingly vulnerable to interdiction by the Ukrainian forces. And that's where the Ukrainians have an advantage.
And they have been taking that advantage thanks to a lot of Western weapons as well. Doug Lute, thank you very much. President Biden also spoke today with the...
So I think you've absolutely seen a very clear difference in the way that people who are fleeing instability and war and conflict that they had no part in creating from Ukraine, how they are being welcomed into neighboring countries versus how people who were fleeing the same factors that they played no part in creating in Syria or Afghanistan or other places were also welcomed into some of those same nations. And that is a distinction worth making and worth pointing out, because there was an existing global refugee crisis before Russia invaded Ukraine. There were some 80 million displaced people around the world from a number of different nations. And we've just added another 10 million people to that list, both internally displaced and refugees. So I think there's more conversation now among leaders about how to better coordinate, because even if the war ended tomorrow, many of these millions of people still need help.
Yeah, indeed. And then there's going to be an entire country that's going to need to be rebuilt. And as you make a very valid point, not just one country, because we still have Afghanistan, we still have Syria. All of these things are still in play. Thank you both, Ambassador Ivo Dodler and Amna Nawaz. Thank you both. Up next on the readout, the numbers are staggering. More than half of all Ukrainian children have now been driven from their homes. We will get a live update from Ukraine. Also, the disgraceful, but not at all surprising, Republican treatment of Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson. What it tells us about them and what we learned about her. And a former Manhattan prosecutor who investigated Trump says he believes Trump is guilty of numerous felonies. Plus, new reporting tonight on Ginny Thomas and the dozens of text messages she sent her pen pal, Mark Meadows, to encourage him to overturn the election. The readout continues after this.
Out here.
Doing it consistent with our allies.
And oil.
Why choose?
Has fled conflict in Ukraine. In 2014, she escaped violence in the east. Now, 8 years later, retreating west again. Many Ukrainian orphans like Leah are deemed social orphans. They have living parents unable to care for them.
My mom in Mariupol, and my dad in Kiev was my brother. And it's hard. I don't know what happened with my mom, if she died or...
The 5th of March is the last time you talked to your mom?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Do you know where she is now?
I don't know.
Ukraine has one of the largest orphanage systems in Europe, caring for almost 100,000 children, according to UNICEF. The agency also warns that children fleeing war are at heightened risk for trafficking. It's a concern for Mykola Zaharov, the director of Leah's orphanage. It's a big danger, he says. It's why they've registered all the children with the Ukrainian embassy here in Poland. Ukraine is among the top countries for U.S. adoptions, according to State Department data. It's where American Wendy Farrell found her daughter. She then started a nonprofit to support this orphanage and flew here when the war broke out.
What's it been like to watch these kids go through all of this?
Our kids are very resilient, but it is traumatic.
She's working to bring them to the U.S.
I don't want them to be lost in the shuffle.
But the U.S. consulate is backlogged, and Ukraine has expressed concern about moving children out of Europe. For Leah, America would be a dream come true, but her heart is with Ukraine. Leah says she feels pain whenever she plays her favorite song. It's called Pray for Ukraine. She hopes the world will. Dasha Burns, NBC News, Ponica, Poland.
Just no end to the heartbreak, is there? Up next, the crush of high gas prices. Some states trying to ease the pain. Will it work?
40s and 50s this weekend, close to 70 on Monday. Then the preset moves in by Tuesday of next week, Brian.
Phil, thanks. You can help LifeScape in their mission to empower everyone to live their best life. Join us for our Empowered by LifeScape special, Saturday night at 6:30 on KDLT, or all next week at 1:30 on the CW. All donations given during the special will be matched by LifeScape's partners. We'll be right back here on KSFY.
President Biden today talked about a mechanism to know whether China was going to be helping Russia. Obviously, that mechanism will be coordinated with the Europeans. So has China helped Russia avoid sanctions at all? And what would be the consequences, do you think, if China helped Russia avoid sanctions or in fact, threw a lifeline to Putin overall?
I think both President Biden and our presidents on the 1st of April will be communicating the exact same message to China. Do not help Russia circumvent these sanctions, and do not help Russia with military material. We in Europe have been hit ourselves by these sanctions. They have consequences on us too. And we will not be sitting back and looking at anyone else trying to help Russia circumvent them.
Ambassador Stavros Lambrinidis, thank you very much.
Thank you.
In the day's other news, the United States, Japan, and South Korea condemned North Korea for launching what appeared to be its largest intercontinental ballistic missile yet. The North claimed that it was a new type aimed at deterring nuclear war. South Korea said the missile was fired from near Pyongyang, flew nearly 700 miles, and apparently fell into the sea off northern Japan. Tokyo called it unforgivably reckless.
There was no warning beforehand, and the fact that North Korea made the missile land in our country's exclusive economic zone is a major issue and an extremely dangerous action for the safety of aircraft and ships.
South Korea responded by test firing missiles of its own. Search teams in southern China have found the first large pieces of debris from Monday's plane crash that killed 132 people. They're still hunting for the second black box recorder. The crews scoured muddy hills again today. They recovered a part of the plane's wing and pieces of an engine, plus more belongings of passengers. Back in this country, former President Trump today is suing Hillary Clinton and other Democrats, alleging that they falsely claimed that his 2016 campaign colluded with Russia. The federal lawsuit says resulting investigations cost Mr. Trump $24 million, and it seeks triple damages. A 2020 U.S. Senate report found that Moscow did try to boost the Trump effort. The U.S. Senate's top Republican came out today in opposition to Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson for the U.S. Supreme Court. Mitch McConnell accused her of disguising far-left views after her confirmation hearings ended today. The Democrat who chaired the hearing, Senator Dick Durbin, urged other Republicans to help make Jackson the first black woman justice. They spoke on the Senate floor.
After studying the nominee's record and watching her performance this week, I cannot and will not support Judge Jackson for a lifetime appointment to the Supreme Court. Nothing we saw this week convinced me that either President Biden or Judge Jackson's deeply invested far-left fan club have misjudged her.
If this turns out to be a strictly partisan vote with this historic opportunity, it'll be sad. Sad for our country and sad as a commentary on where the parties are today. I'm hoping, I'm still hoping, that several Republicans, I hope many more, will step forward and support her nomination. I'm disappointed with Senator McConnell's decision, but I'm not surprised.
Democratic Majority Leader Chuck Schumer said today he's aiming for a confirmation vote in the full Senate before a spring recess begins in 2 weeks. On the pandemic, professional athletes and performers in New York City will now be exempt from a vaccine mandate for private workers. Mayor Eric Adams announced it today. He said that it will aid economic recovery. The pandemic is also fueling population shifts. New census data shows that 73% of U.S. counties had more deaths than births from mid-2020 to mid-2021, due in part to COVID. And the cities of New York, Los Angeles, San Francisco, and Chicago had the biggest population losses, intensifying previous migration trends. The Biden administration unveiled new procedures today to speed legal asylum claims at the U.S. southern border. The goal is to deal with a backlog of nearly 1.7 million cases. Proposed rules would let asylum officers decide claims. Currently, only immigration judges have that authority. In economic news, first-time claims for unemployment benefits fell last week to 187,000. That is the lowest since 1969. And on Wall Street today, the stock market seesaw tipped back up, with major indexes gaining 1 to 2%. The Dow Jones Industrial Average gained 349 points to close at 34,708. The Nasdaq rose 269 points. The S&P 500 added 64. Still to come on the NewsHour, states call in the National Guard to mitigate school staffing shortages. Black Lives Matter advocates become the latest in a long line of activists turned politicians. Deaf actress Marlee Matlin gives her take on casting people with disabilities, plus much more.
This is the PBS NewsHour from WETA Studios in Washington and in the West from the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism at Arizona State University.
Millions of Ukrainians have fled the war and sought refuge in nations to the west. One of those countries is tiny Moldova, the most impoverished nation in Europe. More than 300,000 refugees have arrived in this former Soviet republic, which has a population of just 2.9 million people. Many refugees have by now moved on, but the strain remains. Special correspondent Willem Mark reports on a nation without many means whose people are rising to the moment.
For Ukrainian refugee Yelena Mosterts, making beds may be a first step to rebuilding her life. She's just started volunteering at Fidesz, a refugee placement center in Moldova, Ukraine's smallest neighbor.
Everybody do something possible to help in this situation. So I try to help here people from Ukraine, try to help people from Fidesz because they do a very good job.
Just days ago, this center in the Moldovan capital Chisinau welcomed her, alongside other Ukrainian women suddenly forced from their former lives.
A lot of people I see cry. It's very, very hard to see.
Many tears here are shed for Ukraine's southern coastal region, close to Moldova, and for 40 years Yelena's home. Now it's this small room, shared with Tanya, the mother of her ex-husband who stayed in Ukraine, and her 5-year-old daughter, Sonia. Helping Yelena settle in is Elena Balatsel, a Moldovan tourism professor turned mother hen for many here at this Catholic charity. She too is a volunteer.
You feel everything they feel, everything. It goes through you. You try to help as much as you can, and at some point you feel like, okay, I do as much as I can, and it's still like it's not enough, you know?
One Ukrainian woman asked us to talk with her husband in the heavily bombarded city of Mykolaiv.
Are you happy that your wife is here in Moldova?
Yeah, I'm very happy. So I made this move for myself. I can protect my family, my wife, my children.
Are you grateful to countries like Moldova taking so many people in and looking after them?
Yeah, I'm very thankful to Moldova. I'm very thankful to other countries who's taken our people.
This complex houses around 100 refugees. honoured guests, as some Moldovans call them. It's one of dozens across this tiny country of just under 3 million people, now filled with those fleeing war, transforming table tennis halls into temporary dormitories, classrooms into canteen kitchens, with more Ukrainians arriving each day by the busload.
What started as a flood of families is today just a steady trickle of traffic, but authorities here in Moldova have concerns with the city of Odessa. Just half an hour down this road comes under sustained attack. It could lead to a fresh torrent of people.
More than 330,000 have already entered Moldova. Most move on elsewhere, lining up for visas outside the capital Chisinau's embassies. But around 100,000.
Philadelphia, the city of Rocky, the ultimate underdog.
Being the underdogs and being doubted is what we thrive off of.
The cast includes shot blocker Casey Nadefo, mustachioed sharpshooter Doug Eddert, and their Take No Prisoners coach Shaheen Holloway.
I don't think these guys are intimidated by anybody, because these guys just go out and play basketball and have fun.
St. Peter's is old school. There are no dedicated workout rooms, special practice facilities, or athletic dorms. Here, the players are students, and they are all in this together.
That's why everyone here is proud as a Peacock. Ann Thompson, NBC News, Jersey City, New Jersey.
I thought Ann was going to take the shot. That's nightly news for this Thursday. Tomorrow, I'll be reporting from Poland, not far from the border with Ukraine. Thank you for watching, everyone. I'm Lester Holt. Please take care of yourself and each other. Good night.
American Song Contest is off to an
went through the first 2 rounds through both Georgia State.
Who actually owns this yacht on paper? It could be anyone. It could be a random person, a passerby. It really doesn't matter. The way to prove, there is one way to prove that something belongs to Putin, and this is done by looking into who manages an asset like that. So we obtained a crew list, so a list of every employee on this yacht, and what stood out straight away was that pretty much everybody from the captain were Russians. They all had Russian passport numbers, they had visa numbers, and they had Russian names. It was a few dozens of them, so we decided to just go one by one, checking them on every database we have access to. And we have access to a lot of them because Russia is a very corrupt country, and so many databases have been leaked. You can purchase any sort of data on the black market. So we just started to go person by person, and I don't know, second surname we hit, it turns out that he is referred in other people's phone books as working for, as an employee of FSO. This is a militarized government agency that is responsible for Putin's personal protocol for his security. This is the agency that maintains his official residences, that provides security for Putin, etc. And then as we kept going down the list, there was another employee of FSO, then another one, and it just all added up. And I mean, these people's job is literally to protect Vladimir Putin. This is what they do. This is what they're paid for by the taxpayers. Why on earth would they all, as a group, travel to Italy regularly to work part-time on one of the most expensive yachts in the world? So there is only one explanation to this, and that's
that it's his. So you have called for, you know, that this yacht to be seized, as in fact others have been, that Italy and other countries have been able to confirm belong to oligarchs. You know, you've done incredible detailed reporting on what's in the yacht, right? 6 guest cabins, 6 levels, an entire deck just for the owner and that person's companion, jacuzzis, elevator shafts, a hangar for a helicopter when it actually lands. There's 2 pads, I know, but there's a place it literally opens up so the helicopter can go in. All of this is your reporting, and this stands out, it seems, even compared to the other excesses that we have seen on these Russian yachts.
Well, does it really? Like, it's have you seen Putin's palace? Have you seen other things that Putin owns? His taste is very questionable, and we know that his rule of thumb is if something is expensive and gold, he loves it. So I'm really not surprised by what's inside of the yacht, and I'm sure there are plenty of other exciting things there that we don't know about yet, and that we will find out. I'm very much looking forward to see more pictures from the inside, and I'm sure they will leak.
Yeah, yep. And of course, I do note, just because we need to make sure we say this, the yacht's captain denied that Putin owned or had ever been on the yacht to the New York Times, and the shipyard manager denied to CNN that Putin is the owner. But Italian police say the issue of ownership is under their investigation. I want to ask you one other crucial thing that you've done so much work on, and I've been watching. The UK has sanctioned over 1,000 individuals and businesses because of Putin's invasion of Ukraine. And they've got new sanctions today that targeted somebody that you've done a lot of reporting on, Polina Kovaleva. She is the stepdaughter of Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, lives an incredibly gilded life with parties and yachts and dancing and drinking. What do you make of this decision to not just target Russian oligarchs, but family members, or even, you know, I don't even know that she's formally a stepdaughter, because I don't think he's married to her mother, the people who are close in the lives of these inner circle and wealthy Russians?
I think this is just brilliant, and I think that every country now should do the same. And the UK has set a very high bar, very good standard for sanctions, and they have taken it to a different level, because again, corrupt people don't just, put assets under their own name. They use other people. They use their relatives, sometimes very distant relatives, sometimes just their friends, etc., to keep the money that they have stolen from the Russian taxpayers. So including people like Lavrov's stepdaughter, unofficial stepdaughter,
right,
into the list is a very good move. And what needs to happen now is that the sanctions, they just need to expand, and more people need to be brought into this circle. So immediate official family first, then, I don't know, lovers, mistresses, their children, etc., then friends, close associates, etc. It's like this game, for kids, like whack-a-mole, those guys, they rearrange their finances so quickly that you need to be very swift, very quick, and just, shut them down every month. You monitor it and make sure that they cannot find a different solution to keep their money in Europe or in the US or elsewhere.
Yeah. Well, Maria, thank you so much. And I mean, as you point out, people start looking, you look at the mistresses and the ex-wives and where the money could be going. I mean, there's a lot more that needs to be done. If you buy into the fact that stopping this money flow matters, there's a lot more to be done. But this is a huge step. And I know that including her was, I'm sure, in large part due to your work. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Erin.
And next, the biggest democracy in the world. Yet India is the one choosing to openly pad Putin's pockets. It's not the only country tonight. And the shocking text messages from the wife of Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas. We're learning tonight that she pressured Trump's chief of staff, Mark Meadows, to overturn the election, writing, and I quote, "The majority knows Biden and the left is attempting the greatest heist of our history."
It's been 3 decades of helping establish and consult nonprofits for Michael Weiland. He says a good program needs more than just passion.
To be run well and to have a good foundation of leadership.
The $62 million program, Gear Up, unraveled. Weiland says there's no documentation that even one person was successful in the college readiness program for Native Americans.
Gear Up came to public attention in 2015 when the state education department had decided to stop contracting with Mid-Central Educational Cooperative to manage Gear Up. And hearing that, Scott Westerhouse, who was the business manager for Mid-Central, that evening went home and, according to the state attorney general, killed his family, his wife and 4 children, by shotgun, and then committed suicide immediately after setting the house on fire.
After Gear Up, the Bureau of Finance and Management established a board of internal controls and looked for applicant red flags, such as multiple sub-organizations. But once the funding is approved, Weiland believes more needs to happen.
Then you as a leader of state government need to have some accountability for making sure that it's done well as being done in a fiscally responsible way.
The question is, could another Gear Up type of scandal happen again with the influx of COVID funding?
Absolutely it could. Anytime you have people working with large amounts of other people's money.
Appropriations Committee member Senator Reynold Nesipa agrees, saying the potential for control fraud exists anytime a trusted person with a high degree of authority uses their power to engage in fraud for personal gain. Representative Randy Gross of Elkton is the chair of the Government Operations and Audit Committee. He says the legislature created a solution. In light of the large amount of federal funds that have been received and are still expected, HB 1281 is an effort by the legislature to implement appropriate legislative oversight of federal funds. But there is a snag. The bill has been on Governor Noem's desk since March 11th, and she is vocal about her displeasure of what she thinks could happen.
Therefore, this bill is bad government, and it's going to slow it down from people who utilize some federal funds to help individuals in our state.
While the fate of HB 1281 is uncertain, many South Dakotans hope those who need the help will receive it.
We expect as taxpayers that the money we pay to fund our government is used responsibly and used for the intended purposes.
If you suspect fraud in any program, you can report it on the Department of Legislative Audit website. Just click on the red flag. In Sioux Falls, Beth Warden, Dakota News Now.
Coyote fans made sure to send the USD women's basketball team off in style. The Yotes are making their way to Wichita, Kansas, where they'll play in the Sweet 16 of this year's NCAA tournament. USD will face the Michigan Wolverines on Saturday. They are currently on an 11-game win streak and have yet to trail in the tournament. Should USD win Saturday, they would take on the winner of Louisville and Tennessee. And a reminder, as USD continues to advance, Dakota News Now will be there every step of the way. Cooper Seamer will rejoin the team as they get set to take on Michigan in Wichita. Dakota News Now will have live reports as they happen. Also, be sure to follow Cooper Seamer on Twitter for the latest.
I'm still adamant that Cooper's been a good luck charm. Hopefully that continues. It is the battle for the tastiest dish. Some of the best culinary minds in South Dakota gathering today to see whose meal comes out on top. Hey, Tyler.
Hey there, Sam. The wind increasing across the area as we head into Friday, which is going to lead to a high fire danger across the region. We'll time everything out and let you know what to expect coming up in your first alert forecast.
Tyler, thank you. Beginning next week, you can meet the candidates running for office in Sioux Falls. We have invited candidates for city council and mayor to sit down with us to discuss the issues. Those interviews will take place live over the next 2 weeks on Dakota News Now at 5:30 or at 6:30 on KDLT. We are still finalizing dates with candidates, but you can see the latest schedule right now at dakotanewsnow.com. We'll be right back.
What's next for weather?
$90 billion for public and private schools, most of which it appears have made their way to school districts. So did any of that go towards any of these concerns?
Absolutely. We have seen in those school districts where educators and their unions and parents and students, administrators are working together, they have developed a collaborative plan that is making use of those funds, and we've seen them use them to hire nurses, counselors, which we know we need, and mental health experts. We've seen them use them to partner with organizations within the community. We've also seen them use those funds to begin the steps to build community schools so that we can support our students, we can support that whole student with all of the needs that they have. We have had to continue to fight to make sure that those funds are used in the manner that they are intended so that we can provide more educators, more resources, more supports for our students.
That is Becky Pringle, president of the National Education Association, joining us tonight. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Specifically is you have cause to sue the city if you can show that there has been damage to your business. But basically what it's doing is you have a few bar owners now that have paid the right lobbyist in Tallahassee, and they've been able to, change the law. Unfortunately, This is how our system works. And it's a shame for the residents and for our police that are doing everything they can to make our city safe.
That's fascinating. Had not heard about the law, and you're right, it allows the tyranny of the minority of the business owners, and the rest of businesses have to deal with the images on the screen. Former Mayor Philip Levine, good to see you, sir. Thanks for taking time out of the vacation.
Thank you.
Yeah, good to see you. All right, coming up, President Trump heads to Georgia this weekend for a rally. Why that state's Republican lieutenant governor says it would be far better if he stayed away.
I'm Brian Enton.
Can't miss tonight.
All its own. Perhaps you'll come up with your own theory of
where that line actually is.
The rest of the world is watching where you're going to stand as it relates to this conflict.
Now, Aaron, some experts think as this war escalates, it'll get harder for countries to stay neutral. And yet there was a UN vote today to call for Russia to stop its invasion. 38 countries abstained. They stayed neutral. In that vote a month ago to condemn Russia, only 35 countries abstained. So based on that, it doesn't look like more countries are necessarily heeding pressure to pick a side.
A really important point. Thank you so much, Gabe. So on the back of that report, I want to bring in Louisa Kroll, the executive editor of Forbes. So Lisa, the Russian economy has been battered, right? But obviously if the single biggest part of your economy is energy, which it is, and people are still buying it, those people, those countries are funding your war. And it's not just China. It's U.S. ally India, openly, right, signing deals. It's the EU. It's core countries of NATO. It's Germany. It's France. It's Italy buying Russian energy, therefore funding the war and the weapons that are used in Ukraine and could be used, of course, against themselves. It is pretty staggering.
Yeah, I mean, this is why when Biden basically issued the sanctions against oil and gas, I mean, it was very calculated. Europe wasn't going to go that way because they rely so heavily on Russia for oil and gas. You know, it's kind of one of those things, you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. You know, so many of these countries are tied to Russia. And right now they're trying to figure out ways in the future to become less dependent. But what do you do right now? They're in a very tough situation, and that's why you still see the money going back and forth.
Yeah, I mean, it is incredible. I get that it's tough. On the other hand, I'm thinking, gosh, you guys had 8 years to come up with a solution here, and you waited until they actually crossed over the line. I mean, it's unbelievable. But, but Louisa, you know, from your reporting, you know, I know you've been watching this. The French car maker Renault announced that it has suspended all work at its Moscow factory. But it did that after being hit with criticism because it actually said it was going to restart production this week for a few days, right? So they'd closed it. They kind of said, oh, we're going to open for a few days. They got slammed. They're going to close it back down again. Do you think we're going to see more of this? Other Western companies trying to...
We are seeing...
You go ahead.
Yeah, we're seeing a lot of that. We're seeing a lot of that. I mean, there are over 400 companies that have pulled out entirely, but there are dozens and dozens that have kind of said, let's wait and see. I mean, whether it's like Dunkin' that still has franchises, they say, well, they won't invest, but they can't really do anything about it. Kimberly-Clark, Procter & Gamble, a lot of them have said, you know, we're going to do things like, you know, still sell the infant formula. We're going to still sell diapers, but we won't sell candy. That's the one that came out this week with Nestle saying, okay, well, we're going to sell some stuff, but we won't sell Kit Kats. And, you know, the rationale is that, you know, they're trying to help the middle class of Russia. But you know, a lot of people think you got to cut that off as well, because that means that there's still money going in and helping prop up the economy that's going to be then used to be able to fight the war. So, you know, it gets more complicated instead of less, I think, as time goes on.
Oh. All right, Louisa, thanks so much. I always appreciate talking to you.
Thanks, Erin.
And next, a mother and her son managed to escape Kharkiv, but what they witnessed has had a profound effect on the 5-year-old boy.
Show them how you play, she says. I'm shooting at a tank, he says.
Plus the remarkable text messages from the wife of Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas to Trump's chief of staff, pressuring him to overturn the election and to, quote, do not concede.
Not only are you going to buy factory direct, which would save you a lot of money, and you're going to get a lot.
Vindicated is the word. I felt happy.
Some of the things that people who enjoy physical fitness and also, I guess, are Nazis, they
You have no power. You have no say. It was unorthodox, I guess, you know, what we did. It was the people have to win.
6 years after the death of Michael Brown pushed Bush into the political arena, Generation Z is making its way into the halls of power, fueled by the police killings of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor in 2020.
I was one of the individuals chanting black.
When it comes to physical fitness and keeping yourself healthy, that's because I want to live long enough to see my daughter get married. That's because I want.
Osei, now a New York City council member, said deciding to fight for change from the inside wasn't an easy choice.
Do you consider yourself to be an activist or a politician or some combination of both?
There are some interviews that I had within the second month of running for office, and I completely rejected this idea that I was a politician or running to be a politician, but I think that was a bit of denial. I am a politician, but I'm also, you know, an activist.
Osei, too, made history as the first openly queer person to represent his Brooklyn district, and the first from Gen Z. And while he says he draws from the contributions of icons like John Lewis and Shirley Chisholm, he says he's equally inspired by his queer predecessors and by the people around him.
Who in particular inspires me? And my main answer to that is my generation. And that's something that really sparked and got me here. It was the people that I was on the ground protesting with, who were leading those protests, which were a lot of young people of color, young black folks. And of course, work was done before us to pave the way for us to do the work that we're doing now. But there's still so much that people were trying to do to hold us back, and we still broke through.
But for lawmakers like Osei and Bush, the question of translating the Black Lives Matter movement's success into law remains a challenge, which Glaude says is not new to this generation.
We often think of the country as kind of engaging in this kind of linear progression towards a more perfect union. And that's not quite true. It's always one step forward, 2-3 steps backwards.
If not enough people want to focus on it, you get to hear my mouth focus on it because I am those people.
Responding to some criticism that protest tactics only distract from legislation, Bush says she knows her voters best.
The people of St. Louis elected me with a T-shirt on and with boots.
Ann says the failures of traditional politics are what brought her to Congress in the first place.
There is a situation happening in St. Louis that needs to be addressed that didn't happen overnight. But you have been here for a while and you didn't use your power, your pen, or the purse to be able to affect that. So now I'm here. You built me. If you don't like how I'm doing it, you should have fixed it before Corey got here.
A new generation of activists in politics, taking lessons from leaders past and carving their own way towards change. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Jeff Bennett.
Or if allergic to it. Stop rebel.
Republicans are doomed in the midterms.
Well, I think the midterms are going to be, there's going to continue to be chaos on the battlefield, but it's not the long-term goals. If we're just going to keep talking about 2020, we're going to get the same outcomes. I mean, think about what he just did to Mo Brooks. He just unendorsed Mo Brooks, right? He just picked him up on a pedestal and then dropped him because he was a couple of, he's double digits behind. He was fundraising was terrible. Exactly the same scenario that David Perdue's in right now. He's going to get on stage this weekend and, and do his Trump thing with David Perdue. I wouldn't doubt it if he doesn't drop him and unendorse him when he realizes he's 10 or 15 points behind.
Yeah, no, it's a great point in terms of who knows sort of how this ends for Trump nominees. It goes back to something Bari Weiss was talking about in terms of sort of the lack of seriousness that we have in American politics. We are and have been for a while now in a culture war, paraphrasing, and it is one that we, heirs to the Enlightenment and the American experiment, are losing very badly. We are losing because we are unserious. We have forgotten how to ask the hard questions. I'm wondering if sort of things have to get much worse and Republicans have to sort of go through the wilderness that the Democrats went through, say, in 1982 and 1984, to be able to come back?
I hope that's not the case. I hope we just wake up from the stupor and we move on. We just simply focus on the future instead of the past. That's the answer here. That's the least painful answer for us, right? Because there's real problems out there. This country faces real challenges, and Joe Biden should be making it easy for us. But instead, we're trying to complicate it. Look, there's going to be a new crop of leaders that continue to rise up. Every metric we're looking at shows Donald Trump's support starting to decline, continuing to decline. And by the time we get to 2024, we'll have a new Republican nominee. Hopefully it's somebody with a vision that's able to really paint the future of America and convince not only the right but the middle to come our way and to get this country back on track. That's my goal.
Well, it is an interesting prediction. Many have predicted the end of Donald Trump. I didn't understand the movement in 2016 and was taught some lessons, but you make some great points. It's good to see you, and obviously you're putting your political career on the line to do it. It's good to see you, sir. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Leland. Have a good night.
All the best. All right, your thoughts on a few of our stories this week when we come back.
Since that time, hundreds of people
respect to either covering it up or giving aid and comfort to the insurrectionists, which in itself is a crime. But one thing is clear, Joy, Clarence Thomas should be nowhere near sitting as a justice presiding over any of these decisions.
But he also voted literally to protect his own wife's texts in that case. He himself should perhaps be subpoenaed. Let me just, for those of you, just to remind you what was at stake here. Here's Mo Brooks talking about what Trump wanted him to do.
Did he directly tell you to fight to decertify the election, the 2020 election?
He did not use the word decertify. He used the word rescind.
And then immediately remove Joe Biden. I guess that would be through impeachment?
Through the rescission of the election results.
Did he directly say that there should be a new special election for the presidency?
In one of the conversations, he mentioned having a subsequent election for the presidency.
Okay. I am out of time, so I don't even get to ask you a question. I will just say for our audience, in my opinion, feels like a conspiracy, smells like a conspiracy, and looks like Ginny Thomas and maybe her hubby were part of it. That's just me. I'm not a lawyer and not a prosecutor. Glenn Kirshner is, but we're out of time, so he can't comment. Moments of joy. Thank you very much, Glenn. Appreciate you. Moments of joy are hard to come by in war zones, but guess what? We found something that comes pretty darn close, and that is next. Don't go anywhere.
Shocking that Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson couldn't answer this simple question.
Can you provide a definition for the word woman?
Can I provide a definition? No.
Yeah.
I can't.
You can't?
Not in this context.
So
I'm not a biologist.
The radical left has tried to change the definition of a woman for the last few years, but she couldn't even try. Apparently, this is a tough question for everybody, as proved in the upcoming documentary, What is a Woman?
What is a woman? What is a woman?
What is it?
What is it?
I don't know.
If one person could tell me what a woman is.
I've been asking everybody this, and almost nobody can answer it. Congressman, thank you for being here.
I think this interview is over. Let's turn off the camera.
May include pancreatitis. Tell your provider about vision problems or changes. Taking Rebel.
You have 10 seconds to try to work.
We can do lots of different skills here, so we just have such a variety of things that you can do with your nursing license.
We're offering a flexible schedule, a $5,000 sign-up.
Protecting, allowing China to get Taiwan back because it's part of China, that's very disturbing. It's been a very disturbing breakthrough. And how's this going to move forward? I think, as Condoleezza Rice talked about, President Xi's got to be looking at what Putin has done, and maybe this isn't such a great relationship after all. And maybe he's going to be questioning, that relationship. But they do value that partnership.
Numerous products and summarized rates and benefits of annuities, all from
The point is that when the first G7 meeting I attended, like the one I did today, was in Great Britain. And I sat down and I said, America's back. And one of my counterparts, colleagues, as head of state, said, for how long? For how long? And so I don't blame, I don't criticize anybody for asking that question. But the next election, I'd be very fortunate if I had that same man running against me. Thank you very, very much. Whoa. No. Yeah, one final question, right. Hey, wait, hold on a second, please. I was supposed to be an hour ago at the European Union meeting and to speak. No, I'm thanking you. So someone I haven't called on before. You. Who are you?
I'm Christina Arfidi from CBS. Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Sir, deterrence didn't work. What makes you think Vladimir Putin will alter course based on the action you've taken today?
Let's get something straight. You remember, if you covered me from the very beginning, I did not say that, in fact, the sanctions would deter him. Sanctions never deter. You keep talking about that. Sanctions never deter. The maintenance of sanctions, the increasing the pain, and the demonstration why I asked for this NATO meeting today is to be sure that after a month we will sustain what we're doing, not just next month, the following month, but for the remainder of this entire year. That's what will stop him.
You believe the action today will have an impact on making Russia change course in Ukraine?
That's not what I said. You're playing a game with me. I know. The answer is no. I think what happens is we have to demonstrate the purpose. The single most important thing is for us to stay unified. And the world continue to focus on what a brute this guy is. And all the innocent people's lives are being lost and ruined and what's going on. That's the important thing. But look, if you're Putin and you think that that Europe is going to crack in a month or 6 weeks or 2 months, why not? They can take anything for another month, but we have to demonstrate. The reason I asked for the meeting, we have to stay fully, totally, thoroughly united. Thank you.
I mean, sometimes you know what, I'm embarrassed.
That heartwarming video was filmed as Amelia and her family hid in a bomb shelter while Russian forces shelled the ground above. She and her family are now in Poland, where she performed Ukraine's national anthem for an audience of thousands. Take a look. And that's tonight's readout. All in with Chris Hayes starts now.
Tonight on All In.
The very thing that Putin has tried to do from the beginning, and I've been saying this since my days as Vice President of the United States, is to break up NATO.
Biden heads to Europe to shore up the alliance against Vladimir Putin.
His overwhelming objective is to demonstrate that democracies cannot function in the 21st century.
Tonight, why this is a pivotal moment in history as
fly to foreign countries and act like they're president. Some of them you may even know by name, the famous ones like Chuck Schumer and Mitch McConnell, obviously the publicity addicts like Lindsey Graham, and of course the ones you see on your own ballot every 6 years. So that's what you know. But do you really know these people? Who are they, really? What are they like? Well, unless you happen to live next door to one or you watch an inordinate amount of C-SPAN, it's hard to know what they're like. And that's why confirmation hearings are so great. You get to see U.S. senators in their natural habitat. Turns out there are confirmation hearings underway right now. You may have heard about them for a Biden appointee called Ketanji Jackson. Now, Jackson is a world-renowned legal genius who, for reasons that are still not clear, cannot determine what a woman is. We told you about her last night. But so far, the star of these hearings has not been Ketanji Jackson. It's been a junior senator from New Jersey called Cory Booker. Now, like Ketanji Jackson, Cory Booker is also a world-famous legal scholar, hence his seat on the Judiciary Committee. Booker attended not only Stanford, and Yale Law School, but then went all the way to Oxford University in England on the coveted Rhodes Scholarship. He is
milestone event. It opens up completely new opportunities for the Black Sea Fleet to use existing Ukrainian infrastructure for our logistics operations. Until that is, it doesn't. So not according to plan. Nor life returning to normal, which is even crueler to suggest. In and around Kharkiv is the aftermath of a missile strike, killing 6 at a shopping mall outside the city. The regional governor there saying 140 multiple launch rockets attacks, 44 tanks and artillery shells. This is what we call a stable situation, end quote. Life is certainly not returning to normal for the nearly 4 million Ukrainians who've had to leave the country, or the children who now cannot leave. This is Milena. Take a look at that picture. A little girl lying in a hospital bed with sandbags in the windows so she doesn't get even more injured by a nearby blast. She is 11 years old. She's at a children's hospital in Zaporizhia, recovering from a gunshot to her jaw. At the same hospital, a little boy, Artem, just 3 years old, by another window with sandbags. He was hit in the stomach by shrapnel. Nothing about his wounds or the sandbags or anything in this picture, in this window, in any way says normal, and it never should. The UN says 105 children have been wounded since the war began and 78 killed, but those are just the numbers that they've managed to confirm. The likely death toll is much higher. The actual figures are much higher. CNN's Ivan Watson visited that hospital today, and we'll have a conversation with him about it just ahead. Also, to Russia's claim that all is going according to plan, there is this. President Biden today at an emergency NATO summit. The president announcing more than $1 billion humanitarian aid for Ukrainians, more slots for Ukrainian refugees, and tighter sanctions on Russia. He was also asked about something that would not even be a topic for discussion, yet chillingly now is.
So you've warned about the real threat of chemical weapons being used. Have you gathered specific intelligence that suggests that President Putin is deploying these weapons, moving them to position, or considering their use? And would the U.S. or NATO respond with military action if he did use chemical weapons?
You know, on the first question, I can't answer that. I'm not going to give you intelligence data, number one. Number two, we would respond. We would respond if he uses it. The nature of the response would depend on the nature of the use.
Thankfully, that moment has not come. What is happening, though, appears to be new signs that the Ukrainian counteroffensive east of Kyiv is gaining ground. Air raid sirens have been heard tonight in the capital. CNN Frederick Blayton is there for us now. So we just got new video showing heavy rocket attacks in Irpin. What more do we know?
Hi there, Anderson. Well, this is something that was happening throughout the course of the day. We were actually in touch there with the mayor of Irpin, and he was saying, yes, those heavy rocket attacks were happening, and they're happening just as Ukrainian forces are actually moving back into Irpin. The national police is back on the ground there, but as you can see there on those pictures, it's still far away from any sort of sense of normalcy there in Irpin. And of course, the same is pretty much true here for Kyiv as well. It still is very much a city that is very much on a war footing. And you know, the person who's in charge of really making the city still work and making the citizens here still have even the semblance of some sort of life is the city's mayor, which is Vitaly Klitschko, the former boxing champ. He's working very closely with his brother Vladimir Klitschko, who of course was also a world heavyweight champion. And I actually got to visit the two in their in a secret location where they were running everything. And here's what they told me.
As Vladimir Putin continues his assault on Ukraine, the U.S. believes taking the capital, Kyiv, remains Russia's main goal. But the city's mayor, former world boxing champ Vitaly Klitschko, vows Putin's troops will not enter this town. We met the mayor and his brother Vladimir Klitschko, himself a former boxing champion, in a secret location in Kyiv.
Do you think that you have what it takes to fend them off completely and that this city will not be taken by Russia?
It's our hometown. We fight. We never go to the knee. We don't want to be slaves. We don't want back to USSR to live in dictator, to live in authoritarianism. We see our country as modern European democratic country.
The Klitschkos are on the move 24/7, visiting residential areas shelled by the Russian army, sometimes getting emotional when seeing the aftermath of Russian attacks.
Putin says he's only targeting military targets. Bullshit. Sorry. Where is military target?
comforting those affected by the war, and overseeing the effort to train those looking to confront Russian forces.
You've really stepped up and really have organized the defense of the city. How did you manage to do that, learn that so quickly, learning on the fly?
We don't need to organize. I meet people in blog post with very peaceful profession, artist, musician, doctors, never ever have idea to take the uniform and take the weapons in the hand. But right now, they in the street and ready to fight. A few days ago, the apartment building destroyed from rocket. One man, around 60 years old, coming to me and asked what I have to doing. What I have to do right now. I give him proposal to evacuate him to my safety zone, to west of Ukraine. He told, Mr. Klitschko, my mayor, I don't want to leave from my hometown. Please, give me weapons. I am ready to defend my family, my lovely Kyiv. Instead the panic, instead demoralization, the people motivate so much and have spirit to defend our future.
But they're up against a strong and better equipped foe. As President Biden visits Europe to meet NATO allies, the Klitschko's message is get tougher on Putin.
What are your demands? What do you guys need to continue this fight?
Our will is strong, and it's better and stronger than any army and any weapon. But we definitely need to close our sky. Our civilians and our cities are getting destroyed, and it's continuing while we're giving this interview and speaking about it. The fights are still going on. We need supply of the defensive weapons. And you guys just need to stop any economical relationship with Russia. This way, we will isolate them, make him weaker, and just show that international law cannot be broken. Oil. Obviously, the world needs oil and gas, but it's better to pay higher price than to pay with lives for that oil.
And so you guys obviously, or you want a no-fly zone, I gather, and aircraft, anti-aircraft systems and the like to beat the Russians in the skies. That's one of the most important things, right?
If you supply us with defensive weapons, we're going to close the skies on our own. We have enough men and women that are going to stand for the country and will defend it as strong, as much as possible. And we're going to close the sky on our own. We just need the defensive equipment for that.
Vitaly Klitschko knows Joe Biden well. The two met both in Washington, D.C. and in Kyiv when Biden was vice president and the U.S. frontman for Ukraine policy in the Obama administration.
What's your message to Joe Biden as he comes to Europe?
Stay with Ukraine. Thank you very much for support. Support Ukraine. With our friends, we are much stronger. It's our future. It's our freedom. We're ready to fight for that, but we need support for the whole democratic world.
The Klitschkos are international celebrities with massive fan bases in both the U.S. and in Europe. And yet they say for them there is no other place they want to be than in Kyiv, despite the dangers.
You're some of the prime targets for the Russians, you know. They're out to get you. Why do you do it? What motivates you?
It's our homeland. It's our parents here. We grown up. It's our country. It's our home. And the simple answer, we have to be here.
Do you know this expression of roots? Our roots are here. Our father, that was one of the Chernobyl survivors, and he was one of the liquidators that buried in Kyiv, and he's Ukrainian as it could be. Our relatives, our friends, every single street reminds us on some memories in life. And that's something that gives you so much strength, because the truth is on our side. This is pretty much reminds me like in a fairy tale. the fight between the good and the evil.
It's so fascinating to see them and how
This is
they
pretty
have
strong.
risen up to this challenge.
Yeah, I mean, it really is. I was just going to say, I mean, they are really, first of all, two really remarkable guys. And the way that they've stepped up in a short period of time, you know, I was watching them operate a little bit with some of their staff, with some of the people around them, and they've really taken charge of the situation. And I think the other thing that's really important is in this situation, it's so difficult, Anderson, for the people here in the city. They comfort the people, they give them strength, and they really also tell them, you know, they are going to go on and they're going to be able to fend the